Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Mem Tet. Today's stuff is sponsored the Ilui Nishmat David ben Avraham ben Yomi on his 6th year at Zeit. We're going to get started with the Mishna at the bottom of Mem Chet Amud Bet. Shor shaya mitkaven lechavero v'yikar et haisha v'yatzu yeladeha patur midmei v'ladot. Okay, our topic, before we even explain the sentence, our topic today is going to be dmei v'ladot, which is the value of an unborn child, right, the fetus. We're going to have cases where a woman is attacked by either an animal or a person and loses the child, miscarries. And the question is the owner of the ox or the man who hit her, is he going to be obligated to compensate for those v'ladot? And then who's going to get the payment? So all of this is really learned, and we should really start with this pasuk from the pasuk in Shemot chapter 21, verse 22. Ki inatsu anashim v'natfu isha hara. 2 men are fighting, and they accidentally attack a pregnant woman. V'yatzu yeladeha v'lo yason, and she loses the baby. But there isn't a tragedy, meaning obviously it's a tragedy. What it means, lo yason, means she doesn't get killed, because if she gets killed, remember, it's kimle b'derabba mineh. If she gets killed, they're liable. The man is liable the death penalty. Once he's liable the death penalty, kimle b'derabba mineh, we only give him the most severe punishment, meaning the payment is no longer. Doesn't pay. However, if she doesn't die, and then there's no kimle, then basically what happens, basically they get punished, they have to compensate the husband, okay, as the husband determined, it says kind of whatever the husband puts upon them, which doesn't really mean the husband can just choose whatever price. Today we're going to talk about how we evaluate the price, and that's the law. Now, the important part of our Mishna is based, or our Mishna is based on the fact, or the halacha is based on the fact, that the pasuk only mentioned dmei v'ladot in the context of a person attacking a woman, as opposed to an animal attacking a woman. So from there, they're going to learn, and this really comes, you have to think about the concept behind this. Is a fetus really worth something? And this is a very good question, right? It's a question that comes up when it relates to abortion and all that. What is the value of a fetus? Is it alive being, not alive being? How does the halacha view it? So the fact that you paid dmei v'ladot would make you think that it's worth something, that it is actually something real. And you know, maybe life, maybe not life, and that's going to be part of the question here. But the fact that the Mishna is going to tell us right away, which is a shor doesn't pay. Okay, if a shor damages and causes a miscarriage, they don't pay dmei v'ladot. And this seems to be a unique halacha specifically here with 2 people fighting. And we're going to see later also the Gemara, one of the rabbis is going to say, what is it, a bundle of money? Like you think an ubar is money? It's not money. It's not like there's a monetary value to a fetus. Okay. And in general, we're going to have to get to how do they even evaluate what the value is. But it's not, even when we come up with a value, it's not that we really think that these fetuses have a value. It's just that the Torah said there's a value to compensating the husband for this loss. Okay, of course, you're all thinking, compensate the wife. Also, she obviously struggles with the loss as much as the husband. But again, the husband and the wife share money for the most part. Like, she doesn't have her own money for the most part. So giving it to the husband is, in essence, somewhat giving it to the wife. Although we will get into this whole discussion of, does the wife get certain parts, and certain parts should go to the wife. We're going to have a whole interesting discussion about it. I have this, what I call the feminist comment in the Gemara about what about the woman, you know, where is she and why, you know, she obviously had a lot to do with this pregnancy. So we'll get to that soon. But I want you to get the concept here, which is the fact that they're giving payment of the fetus to, you know, whatever the loss here is to the family. It seems like it's not that they think necessarily the fetus has a value to it, but that it's a loss, you know, of potential, as we all understand from miscarriage and infant death, that it's a huge loss, and there needs to be compensation for that loss, even if the fetus isn't yet born. It doesn't matter. It's a huge loss. And that's what comes up in this halacha. But for some reason, right, because the Torah had this, and again, we often call these things a chidush, right? It's not something you would have thought, because it's not necessarily monetary compensation. Because it's not monetary compensation, it's only going to be in the case that the Torah said. And that's when a human attacks another human and kills this woman, right? They're fighting these 2 men, and they accidentally attack this pregnant woman and kill the baby. So again, the fetus. So let's go back to the Mishna now. So if it was an ox who intended to attack a person, okay, chavero, it's not exactly the shor's friend, right? It just means the person, you know, the chaver, the friend of the owner of the shore. and instead the animal attacked a woman and caused her to miscarry, well, doesn't pay this Tamei Vladot. It's not relevant for an ox. Now, the first question of the Gemara is not relevant in any case, and we're going to try to discuss that a little bit. But if it's a person, then they do pay this payment, okay? The second issue, so the first issue is who's liable for this payment? Only a person who attacks, right, and causes the miscarriage, not a shore, not the owner of this ox. How do you assess Tamei Vladot? How do you pay it? Well, we know this from recently. We just discussed this. We assess what's the value of a woman who's pregnant, what's the value of the woman who's not pregnant, subtract the value. She's obviously worth more when she's pregnant than when she's not pregnant. I say that, but we're going to see in a minute, maybe it's not so obvious. But right now, let's just assume Kamma thinks it's obvious. She's worth more when she's pregnant. She's worth less when she's not pregnant. What's the difference? That's the Tamei Vladot. I'm a Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel now. I'm going to read Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel in one way, but we're going to read him in a totally different way in the Gemara. There's going to be two totally different interpretations about what his point of contention with the rabbis is. But right now, let's read it, I would say, the more simple way. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees with that assumption of the rabbis. The rabbis assume that the woman's worth more when she's pregnant. He says, it's specifically the opposite. When she gives birth, she's worth more than when she's pregnant. Okay? It's not like an animal or slaves, let's say. Slaves, they always wanted the vladot, right? They wanted the offspring. They were worth something. But a woman who's pregnant is actually worth less. Now, why is she worth less when she's pregnant? Two possible reasons. One is they were always worried that women were going to die in childbirth. And therefore, she's actually considered in danger, right? There's all sorts of Hilchot Shabbat that we can override. The Ubarashi Richa, if you remember from Yomi, if she had some craving, right? We're very lenient in halacha because we're worried she's going to die. So while she's pregnant, she's actually might not even make it. Whereas once she's no longer pregnant, she's much, we know she made it. She survived. Alternatively, you could say she's weaker. If you evaluate people, which we already discussed when we come up with these evaluations, we say, what would this person, if they were a slave, what would they be on the slave market? Who's going to want a slave who's pregnant, right? So it's a big problem. All the labor laws that protect pregnant women, because nobody wants pregnant women. Number one, they could be more emotionally unstable, possibly, but forgetting about that, right? They're more tired usually. They're going to have a baby soon and be busy with the baby. They're not going to be a long-term employee of yours. So, for all sorts of reasons, they're actually worth less in the job market. And once they have a baby, maybe not the first few weeks, but then, they can go back to work. They can, they're much stronger. They have their strength back. So he says, your whole premise is wrong here. Ella, shamina tavladot kama hen yafin. So in the end, the way to evaluate it is you have to figure out what the fetus is worth. Now, how do you figure out what a fetus is worth? So this, you would go back to the slave model. If you would sell, let's say you have a slave and you want a maidservant and she's pregnant and you sell, or she's not even pregnant, and you could sell the rights to future offspring, theoretically. Or you could sell her offspring while she's pregnant. Say, listen, I'll sell you when she has the baby. That's what the worth is, okay? That's how we evaluate. Vinoten labal, and that goes to the husband. Now, they didn't say this until now. Obviously, also the rabbis think it goes to the husband because the payments go to the husband. Ve'im ein labal, noten li yorshav. Now, this is another thing. This is what if, and now we're going to have to discuss later, what point did the husband die? But let's assume the husband was alive when the accident happened, and then the husband dies. So where does the money go? Does it go to the wife or to his heirs? Well, it goes to his heirs. Noten li yorshav. This is a payment for the husband. And if he dies, he's no longer there, right? It said, noten labal, it goes to the husband. If she doesn't have a husband, right, then it goes to his heirs, meaning if he died, his heirs get it. It's a bit of a strange line because it says if she's a maidservant who was then freed, meaning she's a Jew, like a convert Jew, or she's a convert, then patur. Okay, what are we talking about here? Actually, not talking about what it says. We're talking about what it doesn't say, which is the assumption is we're actually talking about the woman here, but we're really talking about the man. We're assuming if she's a shipcha who was freed, she probably married an eved who was freed. And if she was a convert, she probably married another convert. Now, this is not a necessary assumption, But the only way to understand this Mishnah is to assume that that's what the Mishnah is referring to, that the husband is a convert. Why is that relevant? Well, what they're talking about is if the husband was a convert and then the husband died, what happens to the money? He doesn't have any heirs. If you remember, converts are like as if they were reborn. So anyone who was related to them before is no longer. Assuming they didn't have children after the conversion, then they have no heirs. So in that case, there's no payment because the payment goes to the husband and the husband's not there, doesn't go to the wife. If it went to the wife, then she would get it. But if it goes to the husband and the husband's not there and he has no heirs, so you actually don't have to pay it. You kind of do have to pay it, but as soon as you pay it, what happens? You give the money to, let's say, theoretically, but all property that belongs to a convert immediately becomes ownerless. So you're the closest person to the money once you pay it. So if you pay it, you just take it back and say, oh, it's mine. So you don't really have to end up paying it. Okay, we're going to get into all these halachot in the Gemara. So we start with the Mishnah. We're going to finish before the next Mishnah. Maybe we'll hopefully do the next Mishnah also, but today's class is mostly dealing with this Mishnah. So the first thing they deal with is the Shiur. Now it said the Shiur doesn't have to pay Dmei Vladot, the owner of the ox. But it said it in a particular case. It said it in a case where intended to kill a person or hit a person and accidentally caused a miscarriage to somebody else. So Tama, it sounds like if it was only because the ox didn't intend to hit the woman. But what if the ox intended to gore the woman? Mishalim Dmei Vladot, then maybe the ox would pay Dmei Vladot. Well, if you say that, that seems to be an inference from the Mishnah. But this would just contradict Rav Barava because he said explicitly they don't. Let's read it. Oxen tried to attack a woman. They're still exempt from Dmei Vladot, which makes sense according to what we learned, right? There's just no payment for Dmei Vladot for oxen. So why did the Mishnah specifically say a Shiur that intended to attack a person and accidentally hit a woman and killed the fetus? So, he could answer like this. I'll read the Mishnah in this way. This doesn't contradict what I say, because the Mishnah was referring to any case, whether the Shiur intended to hit the person, whether the Shiur intended to hit the woman. It doesn't make a difference. No matter what, there's no payment for Dmei Vladot. So then why did it bring that case? For obvious reasons. The reason they said specifically a Shiur intended to attack this person and then ended up accidentally with hitting somebody else, well, it's because of the second case. Because the second case was in a case where Adam Shayam Kaben Lechavero. And why was the second case specifically a case where a person tried to hit a different person and then accidentally hit this other woman? Well, that's because that's the pasuk in the Torah. The law is all based on this pasuk in the Torah, where the man was fighting with one person, hit the pregnant woman by accident. So that's why in line 2, the Mishnah explained the case in that way, and that's why in line 1 they explained the case that way, but not to come up with any sort of inference that if it's not that way and he was really intending for the woman, that they would actually have to pay Dmei Vladot in the ox case. No. That's why Katani Reishanami Shiur Sheyam Kaven Lechavero. So it was just a literary thing that it was to match the second case. And the second case was to match the case in the Torah. And there you could say, why did it say it? Because it's even if you intended, right? Even if you didn't even intend for the woman, you're still going to have to pay the Dmei Vladot. Obviously, if you intended for the woman, you'll have to pay the Dmei Vladot as well. Okay, Amar Papa. But now we're going to finally get to, yes, one case, a unique case, where Shiur is going to have to pay the Dmei Vladot. What is this? Amar Papa, Shol shenagachet hashifcha v'yatzu yeladeha mishalem Dmei Vladot. So a Shiur who attacks a maidservant and loses the children does have to pay Dmei Vladot. Now, why would this be? My time. Now, this is because, remember I told you, Dmei Vladot is not because there's any real value to the vlad. It's a unique payment for the man has to pay to the husband of the woman who lost the fetus for the loss. But when it's a shifcha, the vlad has worth because the shifcha is owned, right? This is clear proof, right? For those who say, oh, the Gemara is, women are owned by their husbands. Women are not owned by their husbands. Maid servants are owned by their master. And that's why the maid servant who's owned, and they're going to use it a very negative, derogatory way to say that they're owned. Okay, you're not going to like it. We've seen this already a whole bunch of times. My time, hamarta ma'abarta ba'al muhuda azik. It's as if he attacked a pregnant donkey. Okay, she's basically like a pregnant donkey, which is, right, we're now going to say, right, it's basically as if she's an animal who's pregnant. Okay, they use donkey here because they always say, Damar Krash, Vilachem Poem Achamor, Amadome Lechamor. Okay, the pasuk they always used to quote this is the pasuk of Avram going to the Akedan. He leaves his servants there, and he says to them, stay here with the donkey, and basically saying, they learn from your slaves are like donkeys. Now, it's an incredibly derogatory statement. First of all, we don't even have slaves nowadays. There's no such thing as a Caananite slave. That's number one, to make you feel a little bit better about it, right? This doesn't exist in Judaism anymore. There might be people who treat slaves like property, but not in Judaism anymore. In those days, that was the way the slaves were considered the property of the master. So once they're the property of the master, and then the vladot have value, first of all, they're going to work for them, okay, as opposed to in your house. I mean, you might want to hope that your kids are going to work for you, but they're not, they don't work for you. So basically, they're considered property. So that's a different story. Then already it's property and it's monetary. That's a different story. And then the shore is going to have to pay. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Demei Vladot. So the Mishnah says, how do you pay this Demei Vladot? So the Gemara says, wait, stop, pause. Demei Vladot, v'shevach Vladot mebayle. There's two things you have to pay. It's not just, and this goes back to the cow we talked about the other day. The cow is bigger, the cow is more hide, more bulk, right? That's a positive thing. But, well, the Gemara says it about women as well. Women who are pregnant are bigger. It's better, okay? Even though we talked about before, maybe they're weaker. But the bulk of women, okay? So if you're pregnant and you're feeling bulky and big, well, the Gemara values this. And this has monetary value to it. So they say it's not just the Demei Vladot. It's not just the loss of the fetus, it's the loss of this bulk that the woman had. So they say, yeah, hachinami kamra. Yeah, really add that into the Mishnah. It should have said it. Okay, and then the answer again is that would be included in this description that the Tanna Kamma gave. We evaluate how much the woman is ad shelo yalda, until the birth, meaning while she's pregnant, she has this bulk and she has the baby inside. And what her value is, which is less afterwards. Again, Rashbag didn't think that was the case, but Tanna Kamma did, that she's worth more when she's pregnant, worth less when, and that includes both the shevach and the value. Okay, both the fact that she goes up in value because she's bigger. Amar Rashbag, imkein, mishasha yoladat mishabachat. So now we have to understand my Kamma. What did Rashbag say? So we understood it the way the first explanation of the Gemara is going to explain. Amar Rabbi, hachi Kamma. Rabbi is going to explain it one way. Rava with an aleph is going to explain it a different way. Entirely different. But now we're going to read it the way we read it. Hachi Kamma. Are you to say that a woman is worth more when she's pregnant than when after she's pregnant? A woman is worth more once she already has the baby, once the baby's out, than when the baby's in. Ella, therefore, must be, and we said either danger, either weakness, right? Either because we're worried she's going to die when she's pregnant, or because she's weaker and she can't work so much. So you evaluate the value of the vlad. Okay? So, and that again would be how, if you would sell a slave for not the slave, but you would have someone purchase the vlad, what would that cost? And you give that to the husband. And there's a braita to support this reading of Rashbag that says it better than our Mishnah says it explicitly in this way. That's word for word what we just read. Rabba appears in a braita. We're going to do the exact same thing for Rava now. We're going to bring Rava. We're going to bring a braita that reads exactly like he does. Then we're going to have a problem because we're going to have two braitot that are each Rashbag's opinion, obviously, because they're not Tanna Kamma, but they say totally different things. And then the Gemara is going to have to say, well, the braitot themselves contradict each other. Did Rashbag say this or did Rashbag say that? And we'll have to resolve that. But right now we're going to have a totally, entirely different interpretation. According to the first interpretation, the debate is, how do we do the assessment? Do we assess it based on what a woman's worth when she's pregnant minus what a woman's worth when she's not pregnant? According to Rashbag, you would come out, you would have to pay money to the person who damaged you because it's actually, he put you in a better place financially. So you evaluate it differently. It's all about how we evaluate. But the second interpretation is something entirely different. This is what you said. And this has to do with who gets the payments. Now, until now, we keep saying the husband gets the payments. And if you remember, we just said, before we got to this first explanation of Rabbi, we said that the Mishnah is not only talking about Demei Vladot, it's also talking about Shevach Vladot. The fact that the woman is now bigger. And here comes in, who gets paid that? And that's what the machloket is. And here's where I say the feminist approach here, what about the woman? You're ignoring her in this whole piece. וכי אישה למי שיולדת בשבחת, ואין לעצמה בשבח ולדות כלום. Let's explain first what Lemisha Yoledet. Lemisha Yoledet is for the one she's giving birth for, which is her husband, which is a strange thing in and of itself to call it that. But let's just say this means for her husband. It's her husband's doing that she's mishabachat, right? It takes two to tango, right? To have a baby, it's both of them. And it's not only that, but so he caused her to get pregnant, let's say, but the fact that she's now bigger, that's her own body doing that. She has a lot to do with that whole bulk of her body now. You could read this in all sorts of ways, whether, both of them caused the baby to be in her body and therefore, or also this is her own body. Like she can't get any benefit for the fact that her body's now bigger, and forget the fact that she's carrying it, the bulk, and she's, doing all that. So it's unclear from which perspective he's coming here, but you can come up with lots of reasons why to say the shevach should go to her. Now, it's obvious to him that the Dmei V'ladot goes to the husband because the pasuk says so. But the pasuk didn't talk about the Shevach V'ladot. And basically, he says, it can't possibly be that she can't get any part of that. So he says, Ella, that's why I say it's feminist. It's like, well, what about the woman? She's carrying the baby. It's her body. It's her this. Why are you giving her no money here? Ella. So what does he say? Shaminat V'ladot v'nonim labal. The value of the loss of the baby, the fetus, that goes to the husband. But because we have no choice. That's what it says in the Torah. But Shevach V'ladot, which we assume is part of this as well, even though it didn't say so explicitly in the Torah, that cholkin, they get 50-50. Half goes to the husband, half goes to the wife. This is going to have important ramifications in a sugya later on today. And Tanya Nami Hachi, here's a braita to prove it, and it's going to say exactly what he just said. Amar Rashbag, this braita, v'chi isha l'mishi yoledet m'shabacha ve'en la'atzma b'shevach v'ladot klum. I'll just remind you. These are Emoraim, and if you can bring a Tannaitic source from earlier, right, it always makes your opinion look stronger. So is isha l'misha yoledet m'shabacha, what? It goes to her husband. Ve'en la'atzma b'shevach v'ladot klum, right? All the bulk of her body now that makes her better, that doesn't go to her at all. Ela shamim nezek b'fnei atzmo v'tzar b'fnei atzmo. First, they're talking, by the way, about damages caused to the woman, because the woman also obviously got hurt here. The damages to the woman actually go to her. Okay, that's a separate payment, and that goes to her because she was the one damaged. Shaminat havladot nonim labal. The second thing is the value of the vlad. That goes to the husband because that's what it says in the Torah. V'shevach vladot chokim, and this other part goes 50-50. Okay, the increase to her body because of the pregnancy, that and the loss of that now because she's no longer pregnant, that's going to go to the woman. Now, so you're asking Tina if it goes to her heirs. First of all, she's alive, it goes to her. If she were to die, it would go to her heirs, yes. Kasha di Rashbag ad Rashbag. So now they say, actually, I now have to think about it. And we're going to say that later on in the daf. It's going to come up that it goes to her heirs and not to her husband, where you might have thought it would go to her husband, but no, it goes to her heirs. Okay, so now they say Kasha de Rashbag and de Rashbag, but now we have a problem with those two brightot. We brought two brightot that were each obviously quoting Rashbag because nobody else said that, right? It's obviously against what the rabbi is saying. It's obviously a different explanation of Rashbag. So how could these two contradict each other? To which they say something very interesting. Lo kasha, kam b'mevakeret, kam b'she'enim mevakeret. They're basically going to say each brightot is in a different scenario. We'll talk about it, what it is in a minute. In the end, what comes out is that Rabbi and Rabbi are also talking about different scenarios, and they can all work together. They're both considerations. So what does this mean? This means that a woman who's in her first pregnancy versus a woman who's in a later pregnancy. Right, what's the difference? Good question. We're going to have opposite interpretations here, like what often happens, because the Gemara tells you here this, here that, but doesn't tell you which here, which there. And then it's up to the commentaries to come up with what's the reason and therefore where would it fall. So the typical one is to say on the first pregnancy, the woman is considered very in danger of dying. We don't know how this woman's going to handle pregnancy in general. Once she survives her first pregnancy, then her other pregnancy, she doesn't go down in value because we're not really worried she's going to die. Now, whether that's true or not is a whole question in of itself. But we do know that there's women who are prone to have dangerous pregnancies. So that the fact that a pregnancy, that a woman would be prone to have problems every time she has a pregnancy, there's some logic to that. And therefore, if once she proves that she can make it through her first pregnancy without having issues and isn't endangered, so in the first pregnancy, she'll be worth less. Subsequent pregnancies, she'll actually be worth more because the benefits will outweigh the dangers. Rabbeinu Baruch explains it the other way. That in the first pregnancy, I have to remember now what he says, I wrote it down. Right, in the first pregnancy, she goes up in value. Why? Because we see, oh, she can get pregnant and she can have a pregnancy and it can be sustainable. So that already it makes her go up in value. After that, there's no increase in value. She's just, okay, so now we know she could do it. It's not such a convincing answer, but I like that he was trying to flip it and explain it the other way. Okay, next. Rabbanan. Now, according to Rava, the rabbis say, now the rabbis think that even the value of her body that went up in value goes all to the husband. Where did they get that from? My time. Kiditznan. They get it from the following Mishna. From the fact that it says, actually should be Ditanya, it's not a Mishnah. No, it says, two people were fighting, they attack a pregnant woman by accident, and her children die. Right now, children or child, it's actually said in plural. But either way, what we don't know, if it says Yatsu Yeladeha, obviously she's pregnant. So you don't actually need to tell us she was pregnant. It would be obvious from the continuation of the pasuk. So Matamuloma Hara, so why does it say she was pregnant? To add something else, to teach you that not only in the pasuk it says it goes to the husband. What goes to the husband? Not only the vladot, but also the hara, the shevach, the fact that she went up in value on account of the pregnancy. So Rashbag, my hara, my darishbe. What did Rashbag do with hara? He needs it for the following. So he doesn't darshan it that way. He uses it for this drasha. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, it's only if he hits her where the baby is, in that area of the body. And Amra Papa by the waist is just no, lo tema, mamash. Don't say it has to be exactly where the baby is inside her body, right in her stomach that's protruding. It's anywhere on the torso part of her body that we can assume that from the impact, it caused the miscarriage. If he breaks her arm or breaks her leg, that's not, you can't say, and then somehow she miscarries, you can't blame it on the person who hit her because that's not connected. You could say psychologically, maybe it had some effect on her. I don't know, but right now they're going to assume that's not connected. Hard to talk about pregnant women and losing their babies these days from attacks and things like that. Anyway, in general, this stuff has a lot of things that are connecting to things going on around us in the war. Okay, we'll get to soon about, we're going to get to this now, about someone dying while the woman's pregnant, the husband dying, which unfortunately we're also seeing a lot now. Now then we said you don't have to pay if the person is a convert, right? Now we're going to see what happens here. So a convert who dies. So Amarabba, Loshanu ela shechavalba b'chayei hagel umeit hager. Okay, it's going to have to be, now the assumption here is the ger died and has no heirs. We're talking about a case where the husband died while she was pregnant, but at what point of the pregnancy? After the injury. In other words, at the time of the injury, he was still alive. Before they paid, then he died. So at this point, since the payment was supposed to go to the husband, and the husband's no longer alive, and he doesn't have heirs because he's a convert, and again, didn't have children while they were married, after the conversion. So his heirs are not his heirs, his brothers and all that are not his heirs anymore. In other words, since the ger was alive when the payment should have been paid, even though they didn't pay it yet, the action happened. Okay, and then the ger dies, all this stuff becomes ownerless, so the person who attacked does not have to pay. But if the attack happened, in other words, the husband died before the attack, so he got, she got pregnant, then he dies, then she gets attacked. In that case, what are we going to say? Well, since there's no husband, she'll get the payment. Okay, if the husband was alive at the time and should have gotten the payment, even though now there's no husband, no payment. But if he wasn't even alive at the time the action happened, then we assume the payment goes to her. Okay, that's what Rabbi says. And he has to pay her. But Rav Chisda disagrees. I'm a Rav Chisda. Mare dechi, the master of this ruling, I have something to say to you. This is the big line I said before. Is this a financial compensation? No, this isn't a financial compensation. You lost this child, it's valued at X and we're giving you the value. It's not like that. And then you're going to say, okay, so it's this money and he was, and she gets it. No, it's this unique payment. It's a totally different approach than Rabbi. Not that Rabbi doesn't think this way, but Rabbi says it either goes to the husband or it goes to the wife. If he wasn't around at the time, again, it depends on when it happened. But if he wasn't even alive when the attack happened, then of course it's hers. Comes Rav Chisda and says, no, this isn't like a financial compensation for the loss. Not really. It's that the Torah had a unique halacha that the husband of a woman who's pregnant gets paid back money. No husband, no money. It's a bit of a weird thing, but he says this is something it's what we call chidshat Torah, and then it's only the way chidshat Torah. No man, no money. Made today. So now we're going to ask a question specifically on Rabba, even though Rav Chisda seems to be the more strange opinion. They're going to ask a question on Rabba based on this source. We saw this beginning part before, right? She gets the payment, and the vladot of the what her damage was. The husband gets the vladot. Ein habal, if he's not there, noten liyorshav, his heirs get it. Ein haisha, if she dies in the meantime, it goes liyorsheha, to her heirs. But that's not important for us. The important part is this next line. And now he's no longer there. Zacha. So now they're going to say, it sounds like only, right, that he gets it. And it sounds like she doesn't get it. And Rabbi said she gets it, but it sounds like only he gets it. And if he's not there, nobody gets it. So now, Amre, they say, what are you talking about? Why is this a question? In other words, you could just say that this case where he gets it is when he was alive at the time. But if he wasn't alive, then it could go to her. Okay? So the assumption right now is Zacha is only he gets rights to it. And they say, yeah, but you could just say this. We explain the Mishnah. It's only if he was alive at the time of the injury. And then that doesn't bother Rabba at all. Or alternatively, Ibayt Ema Lacharmi Tatager is actually talking about after he died before the injury happened, but just change one letter here. Instead of Zacha, turning out to Amubet, Utne Zachta. She gets it, okay? And then just say, oh, it actually was trying to tell you that if he was dead from before, well, then she'll get the money. So you can explain it both ways according to Rabbi, in two different ways according to Rabbi. Now they want to suggest lema ketina. This whole thing about whether if the husband was alive, or the husband was not alive at the time of the injury, does it go to the wife or is there no payment at all? Okay, Rav Chisda says no payment at all. Rabbi says it goes to the wife. So lema ketina, maybe it's a machloket tanaim because look at this source. Bat Yisrael sheniseit lager, Jewish woman married to a convert. Vinita brami menu, when she gets pregnant from the convert. Right here, by the way, they're giving an example of a Jewish woman married to a convert. Either which way, it doesn't make a difference whether she's a convert or she's Jewish. If he was still alive, okay, that's the case nobody disagrees about. Obviously, the convert gets it. If lachar mitat hager, but if the injury happened after he died, now here we're going to see. Tanechada, one braita says chayav, v'tanechada patur. One says the person who damaged has to pay. And obviously, where's it going to go to the woman? And because he doesn't have heirs. And the other braita says he's exempt. So my lav tanai minhu, right? Doesn't this prove it's a machloket tanaim? To which they're going to say l'Rabba vadai tanai. Now Rabba, who says that it goes to the wife, is going to have to say that these two braito contradict are different, right? Or reflecting different opinions, and that he holds like one braita. And Rav Chisda must hold like the other braita, because there's no way to say, according to Rabba, that the one who damaged would be exempt. There's no way to explain it. He thinks it always goes to the woman. So there's no way to explain it in the case where he would be exempt. But Rav Chisda, but according to Rav Chisda, if you're reading this with Rav Chisda's eyes, you could say lema tanai, mi lema tanai. You don't necessarily have to say it's machloket tanaim. Rav Chisda can read both sources with his interpretation. Okay, how so? We're going to have to get creative here. Well, lo kashya, harabanan, harashbag. Okay, now let's go back to the machloket Rashbag. What did Rashbag say? What they're basically going to say now is that the chayav and patur is not the demei vladot, it's the shevach vladot. According to the second interpretation, Rava's interpretation, do you remember? Rava's interpretation was the machloket is, does the woman get the shevach vladot? So now we're going to say that the source that says patur, so patur and chayav are talking about if the ger were to die before the whole incident happened, and then there's just the mother when the incident happened, and there's just a mother when it comes to payment. So the demei vladot, we're going to say, according to Rav Chisda, there's no such thing, because that's what he says, right? There's no payment for demei vladot when there's no father in the picture. But shevach vladot, we have a machloket. The rabbis say shevach v'ladot is like demei v'ladot, and if the demei v'ladot won't go to the father, then neither will the will only go to the father, and there's no father here. There's no shevach v'ladot. So that's the source that says patur. That's like the rabbis. But the one that says chayav is going to be Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who says she shares in the payment, which means if she shares in the payment, here she'll actually get the whole thing because there's no one else to share it with. She'll get all the shevach. So now they say, Rashbag my iri ala charmita. Afilu michayim nami lapalga. But wait, if Rashbag is just trying to tell you, and as this source is trying to tell you, the woman gets the shevach v'ladot, and that this is Rashbag's opinion, then it shouldn't make a difference before death, after death. Either which way she gets the payment, right? So now we'll see in a minute. There's obviously a difference though, because if it's the husband's still alive, she'll have to split it 50-50. If he's dead, she'll get the full payment. So that's what the Gemara is going to say. That the reason why they said specifically after death is to tell you, right? She'll only get half. La'achar mita, she'll get kula, she'll get the whole thing. So the chayav here is he has to pay, and he has to pay the woman the entire amount. The ibayitema, there's a different way to understand it according to Rav Chisda, the whole thing. Okay, so again, first interpretation was to say, Rav Chisda says, right, it's not a machloket tanaim here. This is a different, well, it's not the machloket tanaim between me and Rabbi about what happens if the husband wasn't alive at all. Does the payment go to the wife? Actually, right, they all think like me that she's not going to get anything, but they're talking here about something else, not the demei v'ladot, which she doesn't get at all. That fits with Rav Chisda, but the shevach v'ladot, the fact that she's now bigger when she's pregnant, that amount she's actually going to get the whole thing if the husband wasn't alive at the time. If he was alive at the time, it'll split 50-50 and his heirs will get half and she'll get half. But second way of interpreting is a different way. Ibait ema hava ha-Rashbag. They actually all agree with Rashbag, both these sources, patur and chayav, if the husband was dead. Kam b'shevach v'ladot, kam b'demei v'ladot. And each one is referring to a different payment. The demei v'ladot he's exempt from, because that only goes to the husband, and there is no husband in this case, and therefore it doesn't go to the wife. But the shevach v'ladot will all go to the wife. So that's a second way of explaining this according to Rav Chisda. Amre, so now they say the following. Wait a minute. If this is a case where the husband's not alive at all, he wasn't alive at the time of the injury, and she gets all of the shevach v'ladot, why don't we then say, now we're going to make two jumps here, and kind of ridiculous jumps, and the Gemara is going to reject it immediately and explain why not. But why don't we say, mishevach v'ladot lishama demei v'ladot? If in this case, where it's a unique case, right, the husband wasn't alive at all, and she gets all of the shevach v'ladot. Normally she gets 50-50, but here she gets the whole thing. Why don't we just say, well, then give her the demei v'ladot also? And if you're already saying that, Rashbag lishama Rabbanan. Okay, this is an even bigger jump. Maybe in this case, maybe the rabbis will agree with Rashbag about this, because I think what they're saying is pretty logical, right? There's no one else to pay with that. The husband wasn't even there. Of course, we should just give the woman the whole thing, and everyone should really agree to that. But of course, they're going to say no reason to say that. Amre lo shevach v'ladot shaycha yada begava zacha lebuhu kulu. Shevach v'ladot is totally different from demei v'ladot. Shevach v'ladot, she already had half of it, according to Rashbag only. So if she already has half, we can give her the whole amount here. But demei v'ladot lo shaycha yada begavayu lo zacha lebuhu kulu. But the demei v'ladot, she never had any part in it. So we're not going to give it to her just because the husband wasn't alive. So basically, and then of course the rabbis won't think that the shevach also. There's no reason to make that jump. Now we're going to move off of our topic. Maybe I'll summarize what we've done until now, because now we're going to get off topic and into ger and their possessions, and the fact that when a ger dies, convert dies, and again, if they had no children after the conversion, then they have no heirs and their stuff becomes owned. So we'll talk about some cases there. So until this point, what have we done? We started with the difference between Shiur and Adam in terms of the demei v'ladot. We talked about how this is a unique payment specifically, and it's not really a compensation payment. It's something else, which again, we don't really know exactly where it comes from. And then we even said, right, we tried to say, is there possibly a case where Shiur will be liable? In the end, we found the case of a maidservant with her v'ladot. Then, because that's really monetary. Then we talked about the shevach v'ladot and that there's also shevach v'ladot, okay? Then we talked about two opinions of Rashbag. We saw a bright for each one, and then we kind of worked them in together, first birth, other births, different ways of understanding it. But is the debate between them about between Rashbag and the rabbis about how to evaluate it, or is the debate between whether the shevach v'ladot goes to the 50-50 to the woman or not at all to the woman? And then we went to the ger case, and then we talked about this machloket Rabbi and Rav Chisda about what if the husband dies before the event even happens. Okay, I see someone asked, I didn't read your question so well, but what if there's no father? First of all, there's always a father. It just, you might not know who the father is, but it doesn't matter. There's always a father. So again, if we don't know who the father is, then there'll be no payment made. Okay, again, or if you say the shevach v'adot goes half to the woman, then maybe the woman will get the whole thing, or maybe she'll only get half, right? It's a good question. Okay, so now he says, what if a ger dies and I go into his property and I take IOUs of his? Now, IOUs basically mean, right, someone borrowed money from him and the land is lien. So do I have a lien on the land? No, of course not. If I pick up a shtar, I'm not going to get a chazaka on land, right? To acquire land, you need to do more than pick up a document. So they say the following. But on the other hand, I picked up this piece of paper. Maybe the piece of paper is mine. Now, it might not be worth so much, but it's something. So the question is like this. A person who picks up the document, what I really want is the lien. And therefore, uba'ara halo ichsik. Ushtaranami lokana delav data ashtara. But, right, now, I really wanted the land that was lien to this loan. But I can't do that by picking up this piece of paper. So did I basically do nothing? And I didn't even get the piece of paper. It doesn't even belong to me now. Maybe it's parchment. Maybe it's worth a little more than a piece of paper. But, right, delav data ashtara. But I didn't intend to, I didn't want the piece of paper. Or maybe when I picked up the piece of paper, I meant I want the paper and what it says, what it stands for. Now, what it stands for, I can't get, but maybe I could get the piece of paper. Okay. My teacher, what are you talking about? What do you need the paper for? To put it to cover a jar? To which he says, let's yeah. Could be. That's what you're using it for. Okay. Yeah, they did use those papers for all sorts of things. And maybe really you want the paper. Okay, so that's a question. They don't really have an answer. I see your question about the husband now. I'm going back to that question because I see you wrote in the chat. We talked about that it's Baal milashon bi'ilah. Doesn't matter. It could be from znut. Okay, it could be out of marriage that they had this child. It still goes to the Baal, which Baal we in modern Hebrew call the husband, even though some people don't like that term, but the husband. But Baal also comes to lashon of bi'ilah, the one who had relations with her. So it's whoever impregnated her. It doesn't matter if he's the father, if he's her husband or not. He's still the father. Okay, I hope that answered it. I'm a rabbi. Now we have another case. Mashkono biya. By the way, we don't have an answer to that question. So now I'm a rabbi. Mashkono shel Yisrael biyad ger umeit hagel uba Yisrael acher ve'chazik bo motzi'in oto miyado. Let's say, same case, the ger gave a loan to someone and they gave him a watch as collateral. Now, as soon as the ger dies, you come into the house and say, oh, watch of a ger, I'm taking that. Okay, whether you knew or didn't know it was a mashkon, it doesn't really matter. The question is that property of the ger that you can now take because it's ownerless? And the answer is no. We take it out of your hands and say, oh, the ger, the convert was just watching that watch. It was just in case the person didn't give back the loan, but it wasn't the payback of the loan, and therefore the watch goes back to the original owner. My timer, since the ger died and he doesn't have heirs to collect the loan, the whole shibud, right? The what was linked to it is gone. Mashkono shel ger biyad Yisrael, but in the flip case, if the ger gave a watch for collateral for a loan, umeit hager, and the ger dies, uba Yisrael acher ve'chazik bo, and you go into the house of the person that the convert gave the watch to, and you stole that watch or took it. She said, oh, it's ownerless. It belongs to the ger. The ger's dead. Well, you get, let's say the watch was worth $1,000 and the loan was $500. So $500 belongs to the owner of the loan, right? The person who gave the loan, and you can keep the other $500. So you'll have to pay $500 worth of the watch back to the owner, whatever the amount of the loan was. But then the Gemara says, why? But wait, this watch is in the courtyard of the lender. Now, the lender, as soon as the ger dies, all the ownership rights of the ger are off of it. So let's say, again, $500 belongs to the owner of the house anyway, the loaner, the lender. $500 of it is ownerless. Well, the ownerless property is now in the courtyard of this person the lender. So why wouldn't you say that the courtyard acquired it? Remember, we learned all about courtyards acquiring things. Even if you don't intend it, your chatzer can acquire things. So they say, it must be that the lender wasn't in town at at the time. Why does that matter? If the person's in town, that theoretically they could have acquired something, then their chatzar can acquire it. But if you're not in town, meaning if you wanted to acquire it, you couldn't because you're not around. Your chatzar cannot acquire, and that's the reason why if you come in and take it, the person's courtyard hasn't yet acquired. But they actually say hilchata delete bechatzero delo kana. The halacha actually is that even if you're not in town, your chatzar can still acquire. Okay, so delete bechatzero delo kana. 1 second, I hope I'm saying this right. Hilchata delete the mashko bechatzero. Right. Only if the mashkon is not in the courtyard. I was right what I said. It's just not the words here. If the item is not in the courtyard, let's say you gave me a watch and I had it somewhere else. I left it in my kid's house or something. Wherever it wasn't in my property. Then let's say I'm the lender. Then if you take it, you can acquire it. My courtyard didn't acquire it because it wasn't in the courtyard. But if it was in my courtyard, even if I was out of town, it would still acquire. Okay, so that was, again, to summarize where we're up to. That was just some asides about property of a ger and ownerlessness and how it works. Now we're going to start the next Mishnah, although it's just going to start a little bit. This is just getting your feet wet with topic of bor. We're going to get, no pun intended, but deep into the laws of bor right now. You dig a bor in the public domain, but you can get into it from you do it in a private domain, but the entrance to the bor, you can get into it from the public domain, and then someone falls in it, obviously you're going to be chayav, because even though it's not in the public domain, but you could fall into the bor from the public domain. Or it's in Rashid Rabim, even though the entranceway is through a private domain, but because it's in Rashid Rabim, or now the 2 second cases could be in private domain with the entrance to a private domain. Both those cases you're going to be chayav, but only if, and this we've talked about a lot of times, the bor was yours, but you were mafkir your bor. At least we think that's what it is. It's going to be unclear exactly what these cases are. We're going to have to figure out exactly who this is and which opinion this is, because there's 2 basic opinions about bor, which we're going to start with right now. Tanu Rabbanan. So I'm going to leave the Mishnah a little bit. We have these 3 cases. All cases you're going to be liable, but the 2 second cases where there's a Rashid Yachid, really where it's mainly a Rashid Yachid, it means you made your property open to the public. Okay. And it was in a private domain that then became public property. And that's why you're going to be liable. Obviously, if it's in public property and someone comes into your public property and falls into your pit, that's not your fault. Tanu Rabbanan. So you dig in a Rashid Yachid, but it's open to Rashid Rabim. Chayav. V'zehu bor ha'amor b'Torah divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says this is the classic bor. Now, obviously, it means if it's in Rashid Rabim proper, but even if it's a Rashid Yachid, and the entrance is from Rashid Rabim, that's a classic bor. Bor is in the public property. And then, right, it says if here you dug it in the public property, since you could fall into it from the public domain. Rabbi Akiva Omer, hivkir rishuto v'lo hivkir boro, zehu bor ha'amor b'Torah. We've seen this many times. We're going to learn it straight on here, starting really tomorrow. If you make the bor is still yours in the Torah. I own the bor, but, right, remember, the other opinion says, no, if I own the bor, it's a din of shor because it's my possession. Bor is when it's totally ownerless. But Rabbi Akiva says, no. I own the bor, but it's in a property that's ownerless. So what happened? I dug it in my own property. That made it mine. But I then opened my property to the public, and then anyone could walk through. And then if they fall in the bor, then I'm responsible. But it's my bor. That's the classic case in the Torah. Now, neither one right now matches up with the Mishnah. And what we're going to have to figure out is, on which case do they all agree that they didn't say, right? There's bor ha'amor b'Torah, but there's also other cases that are going to be included, and then we'll see which one that fits with the Mishnah. So that's going to be tomorrow. This is really just a starting of the topic. We'll get much more into this tomorrow. Wishing everybody a good day and hoping for some good news.